Okay, so today we're going to finish looking at the life of Plotinus, and then we're going to transition into the background for our guardian spirit, which is the next thing on the list. And we'll already see some of the connection of that in the final life of Plotinus. So let me share the PowerPoints. Okay, so. This is where we got to last time, right? How we had seen the social virtues of Plotinus, like how he discussed his ideas, his empathy, that he has friends, family, and even his political ideas. And then we got to this point about how he's careless with his expression, and that already shows one aspect of how he is not, he doesn't really pay attention to things of this world. This is a frequent image in his writings about how um, expression of a thought in speech is actually just, as it were, a poor copy of the thought, and it seems like that was really how he spoke. He didn't really and how he spoke and how he wrote. He made like spelling mistakes and speech mistakes and things like that because so focused he was on the actual thought and getting the meaning across, which seems like he actually did get the meaning across, despite all that. Um, and to the point that uh, Porphyry also uses this idea of uh, divine assistance to explain why this he still succeeded in his writing and speech, uh, even though that it was, as it were, going down to a lower level. Now let's continue with this, with virtues in this life that are connected with separating from this world. So, although he did have these political plans, he also renounced politics, or he praised people who did. So, for instance, here there's this Dr. Zethos who Plotinus was deeply attached to, and he was always trying to divert him from the political career in which he stood so high. And there's the other example of the Senator Rogatianus, and who was, gave up all political ambition, gave up his property, dismissed his slaves, renounced every dignity, and and he was about to take up his praetorship, and he refused to come out or have anything to do with the office. He even abandoned his own house, spending his time here and there at his friends and acquaintances, sleeping and eating with them, and taking at that only one meal every other day. He had been a victim of gout, carried in a chair, but this new regime of abstinence and abnegation restored his health. He had been unable to stretch out his hands. He came to use them as freely as men living by manual labor. Plotinus took a great liking to Rogatianus and frequently praised him very highly, holding him up as a model to those aiming at the philosophical life. So, there's a model that the philosopher gives up everything, he gives up also any political ambitions. This thing about, the horribly the person is so accustomed to a life of luxury that they're carried around everywhere, and because of that they have like disease. And then when they start, when they give up luxury, they become healthy. This is kind of a trope as well. Like Seneca mentions it in his letters. There's one letter where he makes fun of people who are carried around so much they don't even know the difference between moving and staying still. And so yes, this is one level. So this is more not so much now political virtue anymore, but already purificatory virtue, right? So distancing yourself from, it's not just, being a politician, but doing it well. Now it's, giving up honors, giving up your property. Um, and as we saw, as a complement to purification, there's the positive side, which is always being turned towards news. And Porphyry makes some references to this. So here about when he was writing, right? So interrupted perhaps by someone entering on business, he never lost hold of his plan. He was able to meet all the demands of the conversation, still keep his own train of thought clearly before him. When he was free again, he never looked over what he had previously written. His sight, it has been mentioned, did not allow of such rereading, but he linked on what was to follow as if no distraction had occurred. Thus, he was able to live at once within himself and for others. He never relaxed from his interior attention unless in sleep, and even his sleep was kept light by an abstemiousness that often prevented him by taking as much as a piece of bread, and by this unbroken concentration upon his own highest nature. So here is Plotinus constantly turned towards his higher self, and um, to the point that he can engage with other people and then return to philosophical activity without a break. Um, and here, this is part, uh, as I said, there's this oracle that Emilius gets for him, and about like when he asks Apollo what happened to Plotinus after his death. And there are some things that are relevant here too. So it says that he's good and kindly, singularly gentle and engaging. Thus the oracle presents him, and so in fact we found him sleeplessly alert, pure of soul, ever striving towards the divine which he loved with all his being. He labored strenuously to free himself and rise above the bitter waves of this blood-drenched life. And later, in this sleepless vision, within and without, the oracle says, your eyes have beheld sights many and fair, not vouchsafed to all that take the philosophical path. Contemplation in man may sometimes be more than human, but compare it with the true knowing of the gods, and wonderful though it be, we never plunge into the depths and the divine vision fathoms. Um, so here, it comes up again and again, this idea of being constantly alert. So it's not just that you separate yourself from lower things or for and from human business, but you're always turned toward your higher self, towards nous, and you're so toward. And here you see like a connection between the the turning and the purification, because here he's it's because he eats so little that he doesn't really sleep very deeply, and because he doesn't sleep deeply, he's in a sense always awake, right? And turned towards the gods. And this continues. So in the hymn, it's mentioned, yeah, that the sleep never closed his eyes, high above them. High above the heavy murk of the mist you held them, tossed in the welter you still had vision, still you saw the sights many and fair, not grant for all that labor was useless. That's the part that was referred to before. Um, and part of this then is also that it seems that he has a special kind of daimon in and so a guardian spirit over him, and that's what we'll be concentrating in what follows, specifically because this daimon seems to be, as it were, is it a form of his higher self? Does he identify it with the higher self? That's what we're going to go into. Um, but anyway, there's this case in that Porphyry relates. In fact, Plotinus possessed by birth something more than is accorded to other men. An Egyptian priest who had arrived in Rome and through some friend had been presented to the philosopher became desirous of displaying his powers to him, and he offered to evoke a visible manifestation of Plotinus's presiding spirit. Plotinus readily consented, and the evocation was made in the temple of Isis, the only place, they say, in which the Egyptian could find pure in Rome. At the summons, a divinity appeared, not a being of the spirit ranks, right? So a theos, not a daimon. And the Egyptian exclaimed, you are singularly graced. The guiding spirit within you is not of the lower degree, but a god. It was not possible, however, to interrogate or even to contemplate this god any further, for the priest's assistant, who had been holding the birds to prevent them from flying away, strangled them, whether through jealousy or in terror. This Plotinus had for indwelling spirit a being of the more divine degree, and he kept his own divine spirit unceasingly intent upon that inner presence. So here you see he's identifying this spirit of the more divine degree with the object that always contemplating, which before we learned was the his own highest nature. Um, it was this preoccupation that led him to write this treatise upon our tutelary spirit, an essay in the exploration of the differences among spirit guides. So we'll get to this soon enough. But anyway, this is a very important text setting up that treatise. I mean, because remember, the Life of Plotinus is kind of like an introduction to Ennead as a whole. And later Neoplatonists, they will read this treatise on the daimon as, in light of this. So it's trying to understand in what sense someone can have a daimon that is a god. How can that work? And they'll use that then later to interpret this whole talk about what is a higher self. And right, and so then to understand uh better, like, who is it that we are cultivating when we are cultivating ourselves in moral education. So this event happens, and but he goes beyond, just nous, right? Just beyond being turned towards nous. Of course, whether if the daimon is already a god, it might be beyond nous, and he's united with the one in some sense, right? So in the commentary to the hymn, Porphyry tells us, this is why to Plotinus, godlike and lifting himself often by the ways of meditation, by the methods Plato teaches in the banquet, that is in the symposium, to the first and all transcendent God, that God appeared, the God who has neither shape nor form, but sits enthroned above the intellectual principle and all the intellectual sphere. Later, the hymn says, there was shown to Plotinus the term ever near. For the term, that is the scopus, the point of his life, the one end of his life was to become uniate, it is to henosthai, to become one, to approach the God over all. And 4 times during the period I passed with him, he achieved this term by no mere latent fitness, but by the ineffable act. And Porphyry adds, to this God I declare, I, Porphyry, that in my 68th year I too was once admitted and entered into union. These are complicated passages because it's, what is this ineffable act? What is this um, unity? Some people will sometimes pick up on these passages. So, like, I think, if I remember correctly, Gregory Shaw does this, and he uses it to point out, you see, Porphyry doesn't know what he's talking about. Union with the divine, since the divine is like not in time, it's not some punctual ecstasy, it's something that's continuous. I think, you can really derive that much from these passages. You can't, Porphyry doesn't really give us much to go on. He does distinguish an act from a fitness, and so there is space here for, as it were, some kind of more continuous state or relationship with the divine, besides these punctual events. And what these events are, again, unclear, especially because these are said to be specifically with this all-transcendent God that doesn't even have a name. I mean, it's said to be one and to be unity itself, but it's not like, the in the later Neoplatonists, like Proclus and Iamblichus, they'll have this view that the soul becomes like an instrument in the hands of the gods, and that can be quite. We can cash that out in, like, okay, so the philosopher, he does this ritual, he says this prayer, and then miracles happen. How does that happen? Well, of course, the um it's not because the philosopher can't do that on his own, so he's just become, as it were, a an instrument in the hands of the god, and it's the god who acts. And then there we understand more in what sense, well, what's going on. Or also, Iamblichus will talk about seers, right? That are, in some sense, they have the same activity as the god. And again, they say things. It's not them that says it, but it's the god speaking through them. Those are so cases where we can fill this out. Although also in those cases, the philosophers will emphasize, of course, the really important part, or what's valuable in this, is not the external effects. It's the union with the gods itself. And what that then means, unclear. I mean, there's this stuff in Proclus about how he was loved by the gods in the Life of Proclus by Marinus, and and so and how he had visitations from them, who in general was fortunate in his life. But there's supposed to be some internal part of like being the object of this love, or being a vehicle for it. And that is the truly, as it were, the height of moral life in the Life of Proclus by Marinus. Here, this is also supposed to be the height of life in the Life of Proclus, but it's really unclear what it is. But anyway, this points to the fact that there's something beyond just being turned towards nous, right? The point is made here that it's the first and all transcendent God that sits enthroned above the intellectual principle. And that points to some part of Plotinus's life that, in some sense, isn't contemplated there in On Virtue. Right? On Virtue goes just as high as Nous, and how Nous itself, through its identity with itself and its self-knowledge and its separation from everything that changes, it has, it were, the paradigms of our virtues. But there were some things there that might be references to the good itself, but uh, in general, the good itself wasn't used at the end to spell out the virtues. So this is, as it were, like the beginning for for later development. Say there's something to moral life, to the scale of virtues that goes beyond just turning towards our higher self or identifying ourselves with our higher self, which would be the noetic or the intellectual part. And here he talks about the methods Plato teaches in the Banquet. And this is the symposium. This is the source for the scales, for the metaphor of the ladder, right? So this is the translation you find the Cooper thing. So this is, of course, the Socrates speech where he's telling the people at the symposium what he thought, what Diotima told him. At least that's the frame. Whether Diotima was real or not, it's a whole different question. And this is as it were, this is a recapitulation that comes at the end of the passage. And he says, so when someone rises by these stages through loving boys correctly and begins to see this beauty, he has almost grasped his goal. This is what it is to go aright or be led by another into the mystery of love. One goes always upwards for the sake of this beauty, starting out from beautiful things and using them like rising stairs from one body to two, and from two to all beautiful bodies, and then from beautiful bodies to beautiful customs, and from customs to learning beautiful things. And from these lessons, he arrives in the end at this lesson, which is learning of this very beauty, so that in the end, he comes to know just what it is to be beautiful. And so it's this kind of ascent that, I mean, this becomes a model for Plotinus in many texts. Like, if I remember, it's 5.9? It's 5.9, or is it 5.1 that he uses precisely beauty as a stepping stone from bodies to souls to nous. Of course, it's curious here, right? The very beauty itself should end with should end with nous, but here it says that it goes all the way to the first and all transcendent God. But in any case, this is the source for that. And it, but his moral life doesn't end here, of course, because he dies. And um, that's part of the point of including that hymn that Emilius gets from Apollo, which is that Emilius is concerned with, well, what happened to Plotinus after his death? And Apollo tells us that he became a daimon, right? So there's some preamble address, and then he says celestial. This is daimon. Man at first, but now nearing the diviner ranks. The bonds of human necessity are loosed for you, and strong of heart, you beat your eager way from out of the roaring tumult of the fleshly life to the shores of that wave-washed coast, free from the thronging of the guilty, thence to take the grateful path of the sinless soul. So here, this is interesting because it seems that the philosopher has the ability to go to a new divine rank, which is to join the rank of Daimones. So before there was the question that it seems like Plotinus has a daimon that's actually God. And here we have that Plotinus, this human soul, joins the ranks of the Daimones. So this will be like a puzzle for um, later Neoplatonists, and it will be a question about like, well, how do we take this seriously? How do we take it? How do we interpret it? I mean, they certainly take it seriously, but the question then is like, they take it word for word. Can you really change your cosmic rank, or is it just in a certain sense now that he is um that he is a daimon? And there's and it's not just him, right? He's said to go where Minos and Rhadamanthus dwell, so that's where souls are judged. Great brethren of the golden race of mighty Zeus, where dwell the just Aeacus and Plato, consecrated power, and stately Pythagoras, and all else that form the choir of immortal love, that share their parentage with the most blessed spirits, there where the heart is ever lifted in joyous festival. Right. And so here it's also other philosophers that are here, and they somehow have a similar parentage. Here is Porphyry's commentary on this. And so he says, emancipated from the body, we are told how he entered the celestial circle where all his friendship, tender delight, happiness, and loving union with God, where Minos and Rhadamanthus and Aeacus, the sons of God, are enthroned as judges of souls, not, however, to hold him to judgment, but as welcoming him to their consort, which are bidden spirits pleasing to the gods, Plato, Pythagoras, and all the people of the choir of immortal love, there where the blessed spirits have their birth home. Question about where spirits are born and live in days full of joyous festival and made happy by the gods. So this will be another question about Daimonis and about moral life, about whether we can become something more than souls, just as Plotinus has a daimon that's more than just a daimon. And with that, we come to, as it were, the close of the moral life as it's portrayed in the life of Plotinus. Um, okay, I went through that. Do you have general questions about this? Well, what I just said, or about the life of Plotinus part in general?
Oh well. No, that was a very good part. Um,
No? Okay.
this,
So with
this
that,
like, I'll just say a comment. I don't know if it's helping. Like this last thing about the like beyond intellectual or beyond news kind of things. Um, like it seems important by in the story that it's like only happens sometimes or like four times in life, or maybe when you're dead it can be all the time, but not when you're alive or something like that. Like it doesn't work together with the idea. And like when he talks about contemplating news, there's like this emphasis on it being all the time, like even when he's
yeah.
working or whatever. And then this thing is like no, so it seems like not to be the same kind of thing, whatever it is. And just because it's like once and he was 68 and something, like there's like these I don't know.
Yeah, that's definitely a distinction that the noose, this is Porphyry really makes this point like here that right, that it was constant, right? An unbroken concentration. So, and he makes that a few times, the sleepless vision within and without. And whereas here it is, as it were, in some sense, timed. It's just a few times that it happens. Once for Porphyry, four times for Plotinus, while Porphyry was with him. And and it's interesting this thing about witnessing, because Porphyry seems to like Porphyry doesn't want to say it. Um, in some sense, like Porphyry makes a point of only reporting the times that it happened while he was with Plotinus, and he doesn't mention it elsewhere. And he also makes a point of saying that he also did it. Um, so that seems to be there seems to be something about like since it happened to him, he can recognize it when it happens to someone else, or vice versa. Um, and also, um, it seems to be something like that's not connected with character, right? So Plotinus, the stuff about Nous is connected with his, as it were, how he behaved and how he was with other people, that he could always just come back and start working again, and uh, connected also with his carelessness of expression because he's always thinking about that, and his empathy, and I had this penetration into character. So it's something that's, a permanent feature of him, and it's about how like what kind of person he is. Whereas this is, as it were, it was the point of his life, and he always wanted that, but it doesn't seem to be immediately connected with any specific virtue of character, or at least Porphyry doesn't connect it. Um, and and so, I mean, if it's connected with a virtue, it's just that Plotinus was constantly striving after this, right? It was his constant desire, but it seems different from Nous, which is from the way that Nous works. So yeah, so that will be a question about like that raises questions that also seems that there's this weird connection between the thing that's higher than Nous with the thing that's lower than Nous. Because Nous is connected with a constant feature, but the thing higher than Nous is connected with time, right? So there's this both going up and down at the same time. So that's an interesting
Right, but
uh,
you
uh
wouldn't say something like it's so far from us, so we can only achieve it sometimes, while the noose is some kind of how do you call it? Something that we can basically achieve.
right, and the Nous is in some sense really who we really are, right?
Right, and we
And
don't have this soul level here, which would be something like thinking in time or whatever.
right. And so in some sense, that the nous is who we really are, so it can become, as it were, a permanent feature. It's always there, whereas of course the one is not a thing, the one is beyond being a thing, it's just, uh what it is to be one, the principle of unity for each thing. And precisely because but in any way, it's not present the way nous is present, because like nous is the thing that makes itself present. And because of that, then it's involved with time where you have like both presence and absence, and the connection or the access, or however you want to, the becoming one, becoming simple is something that comes and goes. It's not something given. Um, so yeah, again, that idea that to become one isn't to you be united with an external thing, but rather to simplify yourself to the utmost. And also this idea that it happens sometimes points to, even though Plotinus was constantly aware of his higher self, he was looking at him, at his life, and interacting with other people from the perspective of his higher self, right? So he he felt about his desires and his hunger and his thirst as if it were practically someone else that he had to take care of. And despite this, there's still, as it were, moments of greater simplification, of greater unity, and moments of greater separation, right? Because otherwise, if it was completely simple all the time, then presumably becoming simple, becoming one wouldn't be an event. So there shows that there's some kind of rhythm of becoming simple and becoming many again. And of course, the becoming simple could really be connected with overcoming specifically this distinction between the higher and the lower self, somehow bringing them together. that would make sense. Also, there's the inherent multitude of nous that Plotinus talks about more, which is the multitude of right of ideas, the distinction between the self and its presence, these kinds of distinction that would need to be simplified somehow. So so yes, that's all. And this whole relationship with the of between someone who's already, in some sense, looking at their lives from the perspective of reason, from the perspective of their higher self, and this higher simplification, it's a whole aspect of the moral life that becomes very important to people who want to follow in Plotinus' footsteps, but which isn't theorized in the On Virtue. And so that's going to be, as it were, a desideratum for other things on for future discussions to theorize this. And and also, there's this dimension of this identity of the higher daimon of the higher self with the daimon, its relationship with these religious practices, and also with the afterlife. That also all needs to be still, as it were, it's present in the life of Plotinus, and it's present. And there are, of course, stuff about unity and about unification, and also about daimones and the life of the soul outside of the body, and other treatises of Plotinus. But in the theory of virtue, that hasn't been, as it were, synthesized yet, and that's going to have to be synthesized by later Platonists. Um, and right, and also, well, we're done with Plotinus yet, but also like something else that isn't theorized by Plotinus because he doesn't really have it yet is that so Plotinus, he's a Platonist and he's committed to Plato's views. But it doesn't seem that the Platonic text has this scriptural importance for him. He doesn't write a commentary, line by line commentary on any Platonic text. And and sometimes he has some weird views that it even seems that he will say, oh, he even says at one moment, it says like it doesn't seem like Plato says this. Later, Platonists will develop this kind of canonical authority for Plato, and also in a way for Plotinus. They disagree with with Plotinus on many things. They do call him divine, and unlike any other philosopher in antiquity, Plato and Plotinus are the two that we have their complete works. Right. So there is some kind of, so there's this new phenomenon of authority, and that like how can someone become this kind of person who has this kind of authority in philosophy? That's also not a concern for Plotinus, but it becomes a really big concern for later Neoplatonists, and that enters into their ethical theories as well. But before we leave Plotinus, let's take a look then at the our guardian spirit, right? This text on so his theory of daimones. And the question is that why is this important for us in trying to understand um, the Neoplatonic theory of virtue? So, in the On Virtue, we saw this idea that moral perfection comes through turning towards nous and identifying with our known nous, which is a higher self. And one model for this is it a model or is it the very theory? Is this distinction between the human being, the mortal, and this divine spirit, the daimon that accompanies them? Right? And as we saw, it seems like in the Life of Plotinus, there's even identification between these two things. And so that's one question about so the Plotinus' theory of the personal diamond should enlighten us about what he says about turning towards nous, right? That level beyond purification. In the Alcibiades, the nous to which we turn is called the divine in us. And this is and daimon is a word for a divinity in Greek religion. Very often it's used as synonymous with theos. Sometimes there's this distinction, especially in Plato, right, that it's not that it's some kind of a lower divinity, or it's a divinity that acts amongst us, and it's a mediation between the theoi, the gods, and us. But anyway, so this idea that there's the divine thing in us is part of the um, of the moral theory, and again, so the theory of the personal daimon is explains that. We saw that this idea of a scale of virtues or ladder of virtues becomes very important in later Neoplatonists, and already, although Plotinus doesn't talk about a ladder of virtues, he does have this step-by-step thing of the political virtues, and those to do with purification, those to do with contemplation, and they're step by step. In the Symposium, it's the daimon eros that guides us up this ladder. Science has a separate text on eros that we won't be getting to, but anyway, it's also a daimon there. So again, daimons are important in this ascending. And finally, from what I understand, it's a Pythagorean etymology of happiness, of eudaimonia, which is having your daimon in a good state, right? So there's already this idea that the happy, successful person is the person who's the divinity that takes care of them is in a good state. We'll get to this later, but I mean, daimon can also this divinity that takes care of you could also just be your immortal soul that is in some sense divine. But anyway, having that in a good state. So there's already a connection between personal daimon and virtue because it's built into the goal of virtue, which would be happiness, right? So in all these ways, this issue of the personal daimon is involved in moral theory. Now, the we're first going to talk about Daimones in the Odyssey and how they show up there, and then we're going to look at stuff in Plato and how in Plato there are, as it were, two distinct tendencies. One is there are these deflationary accounts, which seem to mean that the daimon is just a wise person, or that it's just our rational part. And it seems that Aristotle follows these more deflationary accounts, right? And so the personal daimon isn't actually some kind of spirit that exists separately and that can act independently of us. But then there are also the mythical accounts. So, for instance, in the Symposium, Daimones acts as intermediaries between mortals and gods. In the Apology and also in other texts, there's Socrates' daimon, right, which is this voice that he hears and that keeps him from doing certain things. He mentions it in many dialogues. And of course, there's a deflationary account of that as simply his, um, his reason or the voices of conscience or something. But he also talks about it as it were, a divinity and a separate thing. And then in the Phaedo and the Republic, there are these myths about the afterlife. And in them, daimones appear. In the Phaedo, but there's this tension between them. In the Phaedo, the daimon is given to us. We're assigned a daimon. And so it's not something we pick. But in the Republic, it's really clear that we pick it. And we pick it, and it's important in the Republic that we pick it. It's because it's so that we cannot say that the gods are to blame for any of the bad things that happen in our life, right? And especially that they're not to blame for us behaving bad. So it's a really important theological point that we choose the daimon in the Republic. Uh, and Although this will take us back to also deflation, because one way of reading the Republic is to say, actually, the daimon is just the result of our choices, right? In some sense, it's us choosing to live a certain life or something like that. So this is all in the background behind Plotinus's text, and so I want to go over this before we jump in. So in the Odyssey, we have diamonds showing up as fate, as this force that you know brings you to certain places and forces you into certain situations. So this is from the 6th and the 24th book of the Odyssey. So yesterday, on the 20th day, I escaped the wine-blue sea. Until then, the current and the tearing winds had swept me along from the island of Ogygia, and my fate, that's daimon in the Greek, has landed me here. Um, Here too, I must have evil to suffer. I do not think it will stop. Before then, the gods have much to give me. Later, this is Odysseus basically flying, but still. See, I will accurately answer all that you ask me. I am from Alibus, where I live in a famous dwelling, and am the son of Apheidas, son of the lord Polypemon. My own name is Eperitus. Now the divinity, the daimon, drove me here on my way against my will from Sicania. So here the daimon is some kind of divinity, some spirit that pushes you into certain situations, and as it were, is responsible for these life-defining events that move you from here to there. Um, and I mean, so this is one model in Homer that's uh, for the daimon. There's also another model that's very important for Socrates' daimon later, which is Athena in the Odyssey. Like Athena is constantly counseling Odysseus and his son and showing up and appearing to them in different ways. And she then becomes, as it were, a model for this guardian daimon that helps you. And interestingly enough, she also gets, in some sense, sometimes demythologized. So, for instance, in the Iliad, in Book One, this famous part where Achilles wants to kill Agamemnon, and Athena pulls him back by the hair, right? And that's used later as an image for reason constraining the passions. Right? Athena can just be reason then. Um, and already previously, there seems to be also, critical views or deflationary views about um, what the daimon is. So, like Heraclitus can be read in this way in his dictum Ethos Anthropoi Daimon, so that one of these ways to read this is, the character for a man is his daimon, right? And then there, of course, it's an obscure saying, but one way of reading this is to say, what makes your fate, what makes this force that, ends you in these different situations is actually your character, is actually the things you chose to do. You made your fate. So there's already these different views about what a diamond can be before Plato, and there are others, but this is just some background. Um, Now, if we get into Plato, so first let's look at what he does with a bit with Hesiod. So Hesiod, he calls the race of the golden age, Daimones, right? He says, since this race has been eclipsed by fate, they are called sacred daemons. They live on earth and are good, warding off evil and guarding mortal men. Or maybe this is the fate of the heroes after. But um, yeah, and or like he speaks of the golden race after what becomes of them after they're gone. And the interpretation of the Cratylus is that these are actually wise people. So, well, I don't think he's saying that the golden race is by nature made of gold, but that it is good and fine. I consider that it is a proof of this that he calls us a race of iron. That's true. So don't you think that if someone who presently exists were good, Hesiod would say that he too belonged to the golden race? He probably would. Are good people different from any different from wise ones? No, they aren't. It is principally because daemons are wise and knowing. All right, there's a pun here. I think that Hesiod said that they are named daimones. And in our old Attic dialect, we actually find the word daimones within epsilon instead of an iota. So Hesiod and many other poets speak well when they say that when a good man dies, he has great destiny and great honor, becomes a daimon, which is a name given to him because it accords with wisdom. And I myself assert, indeed, that every good man, whether alive or dead, is daimonic, and it's correctly called a daimon. So here it seems like it's a passage of example of reductionary of a deflationary view, right? Where Daimon seems to me just wise person. Um, in the Republic, we get the same thing, and he also says that um, these people who die, and as for those who died on the campaign, what we say first of all that if their deaths were distinguished, they belong to the golden race, and they become that when they die, they become sacred daimons living upon the earth, noble spirits, protectors against evil, guardians of articulate mortals. And so we'll give them a distinguished funeral. And as for the remainder of time, we'll care for their graves and worship at them, and as we would at those of Daimones, and we'll follow the same rites for anyone whom we judge to have lived an astoundingly good life, whether he died of old age or in some other way. So here it's, it could be also the idea that the wise person becomes a daimon after death. This prepares the question about what is the fate of Plotinus and Socrates and Plato and things after they die. And but anyway, this connection between Daimonis and wise and the wise is present in the Republic as well. This thing about will inquire from the god. This goes back to that passage where Plato says that the most important laws are determined by Apollo, because he's the one who determines the laws about sacrifices and prophets and seers and so on. And finally, here in the Timaeus, this is the 90. This is like the most important passage for the deflationary view. We get the Daimonos reason. Now, we ought to think of the most sovereign part of our soul as God's gift to us, given to be our guiding spirit. So our most sovereign part is the reason, and it's identified here with our guiding spirit, so our daimon. This, of course, is the type of soul that, as we maintain, resides in the top part of our bodies, the one that was put in the head. It raises us up away from the earth and towards what is akin to us in heaven, as though we are plants grown not from the earth but from heaven. In saying this, we speak absolutely correctly, for it is from heaven, the place from which our souls were originally born, that the divine part suspends our head, that is, our root, and so keeps our whole body erect. So if a man has become absorbed in his appetites or his ambitions and takes great pains to further them, all his thoughts are bound to become merely mortal. And so far as it is at all possible for a man to become thoroughly mortal, he cannot help but fully succeed in this, seeing that he has cultivated his mortality all along. On the other hand, if a man has seriously devoted himself to the love of learning and to true wisdom, if he has exercised these aspects of himself above all, then there is absolutely no way that his thoughts can fail to be immortal and divine, should truth come within his grasp. And to the extent that human nature can partake of immortality, he can in no way fail to achieve this, constantly caring for his divine part as he does, keeping well ordered the guiding spirit that lives within him. He must indeed be supremely happy. So here the identification between our divine part and our rational soul is quite clear. It should be said that there's a different way of reading this. It's like most people read this as a deflationary account. The other way of reading this is that it's a supernatural account of our reason, right? You can read this as saying, no, actually, our reason is this really weird thing. It's like this spirit in us that's not actually us. It's this higher thing in us. So that's so these these so-called deflationary passages can also be read in this way. Also, this connection with the we saw later that or we saw earlier that when Porphyry talks about Plotinus rejoining, becoming a daimon, says that he goes to the place where other people have divine parentage, right? And here we have it that for it is from heaven, the place from which our souls were originally born. And in Plotinus's text, he's going to go back to this connection between the souls belonging to heaven and the connection with the daimon and going back there. So we'll see this. Here it's mentioned just as part of, the Timaeus giving an account of why the physical world is as it is. It gives us an account of why human beings stand upright, right? Because the head is pointing towards heaven. And this also comes up in the when he first creates the souls of the of human beings, the mortal souls. And so when the demiurge had finished this speech, he turned again to the mixing bowl he had used before, the one in which he had blended and mixed the soul of the universe. He began to pour into it what remained of the previous ingredients and to mix them in somewhat the same way, though these were no longer invariably and constantly pure, but of a second and third grade of purity. And when he had compounded it all, he divided the mixture into a number of souls equal to the number of stars and assigned each soul to a star. So here, our original home is in the stars. He mounted each soul in a carriage, as it were, and showed it the nature of the universe. He described to them the laws that had been foreordained. They would all be assigned one and the same initial birth, so that none would be less well treated by him than any other. Then he would sew each of the souls into that instrument of time suitable to it. So the planet where they were to acquire the nature of being the most God-fearing of living things, since humans have a twofold nature, the superior kind would should be such as would from then on be called man. So this is as seems like that there's a two. I mean, there's one way of reading this with like the twofold nature is um, the two sexes, and then later he's saying that that men are superior. But later Platonists, for instance, Proclus reads this as saying that humans have a twofold nature, immortal and mortal, and our true self, the true human being, is the immortal nature, right? Um, it goes well with the Alcibiades. Our true self is the soul. And we find this again, this idea that the divine part of us is our intellect in the Nicomachean Ethics, Book 10. Right? So Aristotle goes, so that such a life would be too high for man, for it is not in so far as he is a man that he will live so, but in so far as something divine is present in him. And by so much as this is superior to our composite natures, its activity is superior to that which is the exercise of the other kind of excellence. If intellect is divine, then in comparison with the man, the life according to it is divine in comparison with human life. But we must not follow those who advise us, being men, to think of human things and being mortal of mortal things, but must, so far as we can, make ourselves immortal and strain every nerve to live in accordance with the best thing in us. For even if it be small in bulk, much more does it in power and worth surpass everything. This would seem, too, to be each man himself, since it is the authoritative and better part of him. Would it be strange then if he were not, if he were to choose not the life of himself, but that of something else? And what we said before will apply now. That which is proper to each thing is by nature best and most pleasant for each thing. For man, therefore, the life according to intellect is best and pleasantest, since intellect is more than anything else is man. This life, therefore, is also the happiest. So here, Aristotle continues this view of seeing intellect as who we truly are and also as what is divine in us, right? And true happiness then is living according to this divine thing. So that's
Right. And
all
in all of
right.
these accounts, like, but they can be said both ways. Like, is like the question is if your intellect is divine or the divine is the intellect, or even what that second sentence means.
Right. Yeah.
Like the divine,
Um,
or like we even need the language to this. Like, what does it mean, divine, anyways? Uh,
r- it
I mean,
indeed. I guess in these questions, it's in this context, the question is it separate in some sense? Is it
right.
separate? Um,
But
and
we do. He does call it immortal, Aristotle, all the time, which is at least. I mean, he always has this like if it is really separate, all these like things. But
yeah, it's hard to pin him down. The but the question, yeah, the question then is like, are these descriptions of our reason as divine? Are they in some sense denying that the divine is separate, or are they saying that reason is separate? Right. But in any case, there are all these, and this is one. There's one series of texts that really connects the guardian spirit or the divinity that takes care of us with our reason. In part because, indeed, for a Platonist, following your reason, you'll live a good life, and you'll also like be prudent and avoid accidents and things like that. And also because reason, nous, is what organizes the whole world. So, um, our reasons, as it were, is a particular version of that whole thing, of what organizes, of the universal organization of the world. It's the organization of our own life, and so there's a close connection between this divine care for us and our reason. Um, is it nothing but our reason? Does it act independently of our reason? All these passages, like the one way of reading all these passages is to say that they all deny that it acts independently. It's just what we do with it. Um, but as I mentioned, there's this other way of reading, which is to say that no, it's to say that our reason does actually have some separation from us. Um, there's something unlike ourselves when we are or new or unusual with regard to the rest of our lives when we act according to reason and when we somehow know things solely through reason. Um, so that's one strain, right? The connection between daimon and reason. Another strain now will be the connection of daimon with other things that seem to be more independent of us, right? And so here there's the passage in the Symposium, right? It's not talking about specifically about the the personal daimon, but about daimones in general. What are they? They are messengers who shuttle back and forth between the two, between mortals and gods, conveying prayer and sacrifice from men to gods, while to men they bring commands from the gods and gifts in return for sacrifices. Being in the middle of the two, they round out the whole and bind fast the all to all. Through them all divination passes. Through them the art of priests and sacrifice and ritual and enchantment, prophecy and sorcery. Gods do not mix with men. They mingle and converse with us through spirits instead, whether we are awake or asleep. He who is wise in any of these ways is a man of the spirit, right? Is a daimonios bench. But he who is wise in any other way, in a profession or any manual work, is merely a mechanic, is merely an artisan. The spirits are many and various, and one of them is love, is eros, right? And then it's horse, father and mother. So here it's connected with all these things. Many of them, sacrifice and ritual, prophecy, are linked in the Phaedrus with a different kinds of madness, right? And so with things that are beyond reason. And so this shows in some sense, a distinction between Daimonis and our reason, and also they have some kind of cosmological function, connecting between men and gods, and also in general binding fast the all to the all. The unity of the universe is maintained by these universal middle terms, which are the Daimonis, right? Um, and it's not just all kinds of wisdom that are associated with the daimon, but the daimon that the people who are um, wise in these ways, priests, sacrifice and ritual, enchantment, prophecy, sorcery, and so on. So it's this kind of thing that makes someone daimonios. So it's not just any kind of wisdom. Um, and um, right, and it's but here again, it's distinguished from a professional manual work. There's this whole question about where does philosophy fall? Is philosophy kind of in the professions, or is it these other kinds of wisdom? We saw passages like in the Phaedo that seem to associate it more with the he says, the philosophers of Bacchus, things like that. But anyway, well, first text connecting the daimon all with these other practices. Then there's Socrates' daimon, which seems to act like Athene in the Odyssey. And so this is the account in the Apology. So it may seem strange that while I go around and give this advice privately, interfere in private affairs, I do not venture to go to the assembly and there advise the city. You have heard me give the reason for this in many places. I have a divine or spiritual sign which Meletus has ridiculed in his deposition. This began when I was a child. It is a voice, and whenever it speaks, it turns me away from something I am about to do, but it never encourages me to do anything. This is what has prevented me from taking part in public affairs, and I think it was quite right to prevent me. Be sure, men of Athens, that if I had long ago attempted to take part in politics, I should have died long ago and benefited neither you nor myself. Do not be angry with me for speaking the truth. No man will survive who genuinely opposes you or any other crowd and prevents the occurrence of many unjust and illegal happenings in the city. A man who really fights for justice may lead a private, not a public life, if he is to survive for even a short time. So here you have the daimon. It's a voice, a divine sign. It makes sure he doesn't die. Um, Kind of counselor, like we find Athene in the Odyssey. Also something that might remind you that from what we saw before, that Porphyry makes a point when he talks about Plotinus' diamond that he was different from birth. And here there's this began when I was a child, right? So that was like Porphyry making Plotinus seem like Socrates. Right? Um, and and so those are uh, and there are of course other passages in Plato's dialogues where the daimon comes up. Uh, and now we get to, as it were, the most independent of us daimones, which those that show up in the afterlife accounts, because here there really seems to be um, some kind of really distinction between the daimon and the soul that died. So here in the Phaedo, and as I said, there's an important distinction. The fate of the daimon is assigned or given to us, whereas in the Timaeus, in the Republic, we pick him. So we are told that when each person dies, the guardian spirit who has allotted him in life proceeds to lead him to a certain place, whence those who have been gathered together there must, after being judged, proceed to the underworld with the guide who has been appointed to lead them uh, uh, thither from here. Right? So first, the guardian spirit was allotted to him in life, and it was appointed to lead him from life to the underworld. Right? Having there undergone what they must and stayed there the appointed time, they are led back here by another guide after long periods of time. The journey is not as escalous as Telephus describes it. He says that only one single path leads to Hades, but I think it is neither one nor simple, for then there would be no need of guides. One could not make any mistake if there were but one path. As it is likely to have many forks and crossroads, and I base this judgment on the sacred rites and customs here. So here there's an important function for the daimon independent of anything that happens in this life, independent of counseling or anything, of like making sure that you're rational and that you're avoiding getting mixed up in public business and being killed, or making sure you shipwreck on the right coast or something. There's some function after we're dead. So for taking care of the soul, making sure it goes to the right places. Um, and especially it has to do with the judgment in order for the souls to be judged as they should. Um, and so this is comes back again, and um, right. So this is the distinction comes up between the pure and the impure soul. The well-ordered and wise soul follows the guide and is not without familiarity with its surroundings, but the soul that is passionately attached to the body, as I said before, hovers around it and the visible world for a long time, struggling and suffering much until it is led away by force and with difficulty by its appointed spirit. When the impure soul, which has performed some impure deed, joins the others after being involved in unjust killings or committed other crimes which are akin to these and are actions of souls of this kind, everybody, presumably all souls, shuns it and turns away, unwilling to be its fellow traveler or its guide. Such a soul wanders alone, completely at a loss, until at a certain time arrives and it is forcibly led to its proper dwelling place. On the other hand, the soul that has led a pure and moderate life finds fellow travelers and gods to guide it, and each of them dwells in a place suited to it. So here, this connects then the subject of having a relationship with your daimon with the question of being pure. If you do not have pure, if you don't have if you're not pure, if you commit unjust deeds, like killings and horror and other awful crimes, then you're really attached to your body, and your soul will remain attached to your body even after death. And this will lead you to a misfortune after death. You will be at a loss when you die, and you have to be taken by force um, to where you have to go. Whereas if you already if during your life you're pure, you in some sense already have an attachment to your diamond, then you already go towards, as it were, the judgment place and wherever else you have to go. This distinction, of course, between sometimes having to take people by force out of the um, perceptible world reminds one also of the people that have to be taken by force out of the cave. But anyway, if the diamond can somehow exert force over us, it's certainly a distinct agency than us, separate in some sense. Um, and this now contrasts with the daimon in the Republic. And now this isn't about after you die, it's about before you're born, right? And so there's this whole thing about where the souls go. This will be important for the last chapter of the of Plotinus's treatise, but eventually they get to the necessity, right? So when the souls arrived at the light, they had to go to Lachesis right away. So this is the first of the fates. There, a speaker arranged them in order, took from the lap of Lachesis a number of lots, right? Lachesis and lot is cognate, and a number of models of lives. This model is paradigm, right? I mean, it's a paradigma in Greek, and so it's the same, same word that Plato uses for the intelligible living being. Mounted a high pulpit, it spoke to them. Here is the message of Lachesis, the maiden daughter of necessity. Ephemeral souls, this is the beginning of another cycle that will end in death. Your daimon or guardian spirit will not be assigned to you by lot. You will choose him. The one who has the first lot will be the first to choose a life to which he will then be bound by necessity. Virtue knows no master. Each will possess it to a greater or lesser degree, depending on whether he values or disdains it. The responsibility lies with the one who makes the choice the god has in none. So here this is interesting. You choose the daimon, but also what you choose is the model of the life. So have a certain daimon and living a certain kind of life go together, right? And this connects again, daimon not so much with our reason, but with, as it were, the pattern of our lives, the rational structure of our lives. When he had said this, the speaker threw the lots among all of them, and each, with the exception of who wasn't allowed to choose because he was just there to witness, picked up the one that fell next to him. And the lot made it clear to the one who picked it up where in the order he would get to make his choice. After that, the models of lives were placed on the ground before them. There were far more of them than there were souls present, so everyone had a choice. And there were of all kinds, for the lives of animals were there as well as all kinds of human lives. So there's transmigration into animal lives here, which will this is already a theme that Plotinus will pick up on. There were tyrannies among them, some of which lasted throughout life, while others ended halfway through in poverty, exile, and beggary. There were lives of famous men, some of whom were famous for the beauty of their appearance, others for their strength or athletic prowess, others still for their high birth and the virtue of excellence or excellence of their ancestors. And there were also lives of men who weren't famous for any of these things, and the same for the lives of women. But the arrangement of the soul was not included in the model because the soul is inevitably altered by the different lives it chooses. But all the other things were there, mixed with each other and with wealth, poverty, sickness, health, and the states intermediate into them. So, the nature of the soul isn't in each life, but all the circumstances of the life are in it, right? So it's not just that you choose to be a carpenter, you choose to be a wealthy carpenter or a poor carpenter or a carpenter, a wealthy carpenter who loses everything at the end of his life, right? It also talks about how they end halfway, maybe, right? And so it's also accidents. So this is what the model is, and and corresponding to this model is the diamond, right? So after they had chosen their lives, they went forward to Lycesis in the same order in which they had made their choices, and she assigned to each the daimon it has chosen as guardian of its life and fulfiller of its choice. So the daimon is an external agent that makes sure, as it were, that we end up living the life that we chose. So, for instance, if we lived a life where we lose everything in the middle of our lives because, because of an unfortunate accident, the daimon will make sure that happens, and that's like the fate that we saw that appears in the Odyssey. Fate shipwrecked me here, and the diamond first, this diamond, and this diamond, however, still has like this leading function then that we saw in the Phaedo. This diamond first led the soul under the hand of Clotho as it turned the revolving spindle to confirm the fate that the lottery and its own choice had given it. So Clotho spins the thread. After receiving her touch, he led the soul to the spinning Atropos, right? So it sends the thing, then Atropos spins it to make what had spun irreversible. Atropos means not turning, right? Then, without turning around, they went from there under the throne of necessity. And when all of them had passed through, they traveled to the plane of forgetfulness and burning, choking, terrible heat, empty of trees, no vegetation. And then that's the end of the story. But anyway, so once you've chosen it, the diamond does have this guiding function that it had um, in the Phaedo of taking someone from one place to another to another. So that's for next time. But um, yes, so those were the passages that were a bit more uh,
Oops.
emphasized functions of Daimones that seem separate from our thoughts.
Okay.
Um, and okay, and what we're going to see then is that in Plotinus's text, that he's going to play with this question about, is the daimon our nous or is it something superior to it, right? As Porphyry said, this was uh, his stimulus, that, oh, your daimon is actually a god. So he's like, well, how can you have a god for your daimon? And and so he's going to, in some sense, have a view that the daimon in some cases is a separate being, in some cases is just a reason, and he will but his starting point is going to be that the soul can become everything, that the soul has this function of being reborn as all the different kinds of animals and even plants. And he's going to say, well, some souls can even become daimones and gods. And so, we have to, in order for us to understand what our daimon is, we're actually going to have to understand how the soul becomes anything. And then we'll understand that in some cases, a soul is a daimon, in some cases, a soul is a god. And he's going to also play with this idea that the soul always has a structure, that there's something beyond it, something that takes care of it. I was going to say, in some cases, this thing that takes care of it is just our reason, but sometimes it's something higher than reason, right? And and so he's going to try to synthesize many of these passages, and he's going to then bring in other passages about transmigration, about the soul, and he's also going to ask, well, how does this apply to the soul of the cosmos, right? Which we saw also that the soul of the cosmos is in some sense a model for virtue, right? Because he said that was like one of the first things. To which God? Maybe it's the world, right? And so he's going to come back to that question. And so this will give us more clarity also about what this higher self is and how do we turn to it. What does it mean that we turn to it? In Plotinus. So that was the background, and so we have some time. Do you have some
Yeah, that's
questions
fine.
about?
I think I'll stop because I'm like not feeling so well. So just like
I'm sorry to hear. Okay,
fine.
well, feel better,
Good.
and
I'm not gonna be able to. Okay.
okay.
Thank you so
And
much.
and we'll see each other next week,
Yeah.
and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Thank you
Okay.
so much.